A man in 1954 leaves the shores of England and takes up a post with the British Embassy in Moscow. He holds a secret that he dare not tell anyone at the embassy, not even the ambassador. So who was this elusive man? His name was John Vassall, and he was born on the 20th of September 1924 at St Bartholomew's Hospital in London, where his father was the Church of England chaplain. His mother would later convert to Roman Catholicism, as would Vassall in 1953. He had been a photographer with the RAF during the Second World War and saw active service in Europe, where he developed a sense of wanderlust. After the war, he became a clerical officer at the Admiralty. This is when his scandals and the secret will lead to a political crisis at home, imprisonment, and a media witch hunt. He joined the embassy on the 2nd of March 1954 as a member of staff working as a clerical officer for the naval attaché stationed there in Moscow. He lived in a house with 3 other colleagues, but felt socially isolated due to snobberies and the class hierarchies in the diplomatic service, and his loneliness further exacerbated by his homosexuality, which was illegal in Britain and the Soviet Union at the time. On the death of Stalin, the embassy staff were informed that tensions had ceased between the East and the West, although diplomacy was still edgy. Normally his position was given to a married man, with various allowances, but cost-cutting ruled the day. A single man of junior rank would certainly not be invited to major diplomatic occasions, and so had to cultivate his own connections. But Vassall had this secret. He was a homosexual. If caught with another man, he risked going to prison, dismissed from the civil service, vulnerable to blackmail, and be pilloried by the press. Within living memory, everyone knew of the fate of Oscar Wilde, who went on from being the most successful playwright in the West End to a pitiful bankrupt exile in Paris. He needed friendship, and at the embassy he met a fellow employee who was Polish, called Michalski, who showed him the cultural and social delights of Moscow, as well as the gay underworld, and kindly offered Vassall tickets to plays and concerts. But Michalski had a secret as well, as really he was a Soviet agent, and Vassall was about to be drawn into a classic trap. In his autobiography that Vassall wrote many years later, when he lived in a monastery, he mentions that at one of these events he met a man who he described as the skier. At long last an acquaintance outside of work. The skier took Vassall to smart restaurants, where he met other Russians. Instead of enjoying some of the finer things in life, Vassall's world was about to implode. Sometime in 1955, he was invited by the skier to a private dining room at a plush Berlin restaurant. In his own words, in his autobiography, he gives a lurid and detailed account of the experience.
After dinner, everyone seemed to drift away, and the one who brought me to the dinner party. One of them said that I did not look well, and it would be better if I lay down on a large divan, which was appropriately placed in a recess. When I lay down, I could hardly stand up. I was asked to take off my clothes, including my underwear. It all seemed to be beyond my control. I did not know where I was, or what was going on, or why it was happening. I can recall having my underpants in my hands and holding them up at the request of others. Then I was lying naked, and there were 3 other men beside me. I cannot remember exactly what took place. I saw the skier's friends standing in the room taking photographs.
Vassall later got dressed and was driven by taxi back to the embassy. A classic example of a honey trap in which Vassall did not learn his lesson in combating his moral turpitude. A few days later he met the skier again at an anonymous apartment building in central Moscow, who was with a military officer who had been naked with Vassall. Once his lover had left, two burly men blocked the door, and Vassall was interviewed by two Russians, one of whom was a journalist he recognized. They explained he was guilty of breaking Soviet criminal law and showed him a series of explicit photographs from the dinner party, showing him in compromising positions with several men. They wanted him to sign a confession, which he refused to, yet he was persuaded to meet with them again, as now he had no choice. During these meetings, he was asked whether he liked or disliked other embassy staff. A bit of an odd request, as they already had their own spy in the embassy. Just before Christmas, he was given a cigarette case stuffed with rubles. But the meetings with the KGB, though cordial, were not of much use to the Russians. They were not interested in embassy gossip, but files and secret documents. Over the next few months, Vassall duly supplied them with the necessary information being demanded on a number of occasions. In 1956, Vassall's tour of duty in Moscow was coming to an end, but the KGB certainly had not finished with their man. He was summoned to a meeting where he met a KGB operative called Gregory, who was to be his point of contact back in Britain. They were to meet sometime in October, outside Frogmore Tube Station in Finchley Road. Vassall was to wear a Tyrolean hat and carry a newspaper. Gregory was to approach him and ask the quickest way to Belsize Park Tube Station. He was to reply, "Take a taxi." Gregory explained that there were two ways of meeting up at short notice. He would draw a chalk circle on a tree in Kensington Gardens, and Vassall was to telephone Kensington 8955 and ask for a Miss Mary. But matters were looking up for the KGB, as in June 1956, Vassall started work for Naval Intelligence at the Admiralty overlooking Horse Guards Parade, and the information started to flow through. He was subsequently appointed to serve under the Civil Lord of the Admiralty, who at the time was Tam Galbraith, with whom he got on well with both the minister and his wife. His role was largely political, and Vassall spent a large part of his work in the House of Commons. The constituency problems of Galbraith and the daily routine of parliamentary business were of no particular interest to the KGB, who were only after closely guarded state secrets. Vassall, however, despite his lowly grade in the civil service, went on to provide high-grade secret information, and his recruitment must have been a real coup for the KGB, as he went on to cause real damage, getting paid handsomely in the process. When Galbraith was moved to another department, Vassall was sent back to the military section of the Admiralty, where a flow of more decent information resumed, and was passed on to the Russians on a regular basis. In 1958, he secured a lease on a one-bedroom flat in Dolphin Square at a rent of £500 per year. His annual salary at the time was £700, yet he was estimated to be spending around £3,000 per year. He had a fine selection of Savile Row suits, went to smart restaurants, and indulged in his taste for foreign holidays to Capri and Egypt. Men of his civil service grade would be expected to enjoy a beach holiday in Cornwall once a year. It was thought that the additional income came from some distant relative. All seemed well in Vassall's world. He was not a high flyer, but both the civil service and the KGB were pleased with his work, in their separate ways, and more importantly, he kept a low profile and kept out of mischief. But all good things come to an end. The Cold War was becoming distinctly hot, especially when the Berlin Wall was built, and a political revolution and civil war in Cuba culminated in a nuclear standoff between the Soviet Union and the Americans. Gregory, his normal KGB contact, returned to Moscow, and he was replaced by a new one called Nikolai. After the defection of Burgess and Maclean to Moscow, the British authorities started to introduce positive vetting, but still had not cottoned on to what Vassall was up to. Defections can work both ways, and the West was beginning to get its fair share of class Russian traitors. One of them was Anatoly Golitsyn, a senior member of the KGB, who was being debriefed by the CIA. Vassall was identified as being a possible spy, which was backed up by another defector, Yuri Noshenko. His revelations led to the arrest of George Blake and the exposure of the Portland spy ring. The latter caused the KGB to order Vassall to stop any further spying activities in late 1961, but resumed again in March 1962. But the net was starting to close in, as his home was now being watched. A maintenance crew arrived at his flat and claimed that they needed to check the kitchen, as a neighbour upstairs had thrown some acid down the sink. When Vassall double-checked this story with a neighbour, nobody knew of this incident. On the 12th of September 1962, after he left the Admiralty building on the Mall, he was approached in the road by two men, who flashed a police warrant card at him and bundled him into a waiting car. He would not see freedom again for many years. At the police station, Vassall was formally arrested and confessed all, telling his interrogators that at his flat there were two cameras, one of which contained a roll of film. The head of MI5, Richard Hollis, went to the Prime Minister, Harold Macmillan, and proudly announced Vassall's detection and capture. The PM was unhappy with the outcome, and it is worth quoting his words.
"No, I'm not pleased. When my gamekeeper shoots a fox, he doesn't go and hang it up outside the master of the foxhound's drawing room. He buries it out of sight. You can't just shoot a spy as we did in the war. There will be a great public trial. The security services will not be praised for how efficient they are, but blamed for how hopeless they are. There will then be an inquiry. There will be a terrible row in the press. There will then be a debate in the House of Commons, and the government will probably fail. Why the devil did you catch him?"
Before we go on further with this story, we should try to understand some of the events in 1962. We nowadays think of the 1960s as the era of the Beatles, flower power, and technological change. This is undoubtedly true, but it hides another side of the early 60s. It was paranoid, especially with the deteriorating relationships between the Soviet Union and the United States that resulted in the Cuban Missile Crisis. Britain was facing its own demons following the Portland spy ring discovery and the jailing of the Foreign Office official George Blake to 42 years in prison for treason. Now another red under the bed was about to be exposed. On the 9th of October 1962, Vassall was charged with 4 counts of espionage at Bow Street's Magistrate Court, and a trial began behind closed doors at the Old Bailey a week later. He was found guilty of high treason and was sentenced to 18 years in Wormwood Scrubs prison. That perhaps should have been the end of the matter. However, the Prime Minister was correct in his analysis of the situation, as the Sunday Pictorial obviously could not report on the trial, but got an exclusive with Vassall on the contents of his flat. This was done supposedly to help pay for his defence. It made for interesting reading. Vassall had a picture of his ministerial boss, Tam Galbraith, as well as correspondence between them. Vassall revealed that hardly a night passed without a friend calling to see me, Some were men who had a special fondness for me. Few were women. In the early 60s, the relationship between the political establishment and Fleet Street was not a harmonious one. Politicians on both sides had been using the libel laws to their advantage for years, much to the annoyance of newspaper editors. The satire boom was well underway, with the launch of the television programme That Was the Week That Was, and the first issues of Private Eye. Publishers were not going to bow down to the government if they could help it. Parliament was forced to publish all the correspondence between Vassall and Galbraith. Normally this would have been dull beyond belief, with a postcard from Italy from Galbraith's wife to Vassall, and some missives on such riveting subjects as office carpets, stationery provisions, etc. Fleet Street wanted to use this paltry bit of evidence to show a homosexual relationship between a communist junior civil servant and a senior ministerial colleague. The Daily Mail explained that the postcard showed an inappropriate relationship between a junior clerk and his political master. As the postcard was written by the wife of Galbraith, it was probably a curious way to explain homosexual love between her husband and Vassall. The Daily Express ran a front-page headline with the expression, "By Dear Vassall," which conclusively proved, it was claimed, that a common method of address really showed unnatural desires. In October, the Sunday Pictorial ran a headline with the words, "Spy catcher's name, sex risk men." According to the article, they would be turned over by the committee looking into the Vassall affair to the Prime Minister. The press headline certainly did not pull their punches on their take on the lifestyle of John Vassall, with some of the more famous headlines being, "The dandy clerk took up treachery to pay for his 30 suits," and "How do you spot a homo?" The lynch mob certainly wanted blood, but perhaps the real victim was the then Civil Lord of the Admiralty, Galbraith. Vassall got on well with him and his wife, and even went up to the minister's home in Scotland to deliver some papers. But the real damage was the correspondence. This was analysed to show signs of homosexual affection. Vassall wanted a job in number 10, or the Cabinet Office, and Galbraith's reply is as follows.
Dear Vassall, we much enjoyed your visit, and it was very nice of you to write. Reference to your job. The only person I could speak to at the Admiralty is Mackay, but he would probably put you on to Elnott, whom you do not like. Isn't there some sort of civil service appointments board so that you can make known your preference? I very much doubt whether in fact you would find either number 10 or the Cabinet Office or the Commonwealth Office much better than the Admiralty, because fundamentally I don't think you really like working with paper. I think that you like to travel and meeting people and doing odd things suddenly. For this reason I believe being a courier might suit you better. Why don't you try and find out what is involved, and if you think I can be of help, let me know. With best wishes, yours sincerely, TGD Galbraith.
In the fevered political climate of the time, an internal inquiry by senior members of the civil service was seen as unacceptable. The Prime Minister was forced to jettison Galbraith and order a new inquiry under Lord Radcliffe. 140 witnesses were called, and two of them, Reg Forster, a freelance for the Daily Sketch, and Brendan Mulholland of the Daily Mail, were each sentenced to prison for 6 and 3 months respectively for not disclosing their sources. They are the only journalists in legal history to be imprisoned for not revealing their sources. Both inquiries revealed that there was no homosexual link between the minister and the spy. What is to be made of John Vassall? To the modern eye, he is seen as a symbol of heterosexual prejudice. To others, he was a traitor, who sold his soul to the Russians. The British security services were cavalier in their treatment of spies. Two of the Cambridge Five, Cairncross and Blunt, confessed their sins and continued with their work. Philby was given immunity when he was in Beirut if he returned to the United Kingdom, but others like Blake and Vassall were given lengthy prison sentences. Today the Vassall Spy Scandal is really a footnote in history, but he is really a precursor to the more infamous Profumo affair. Macmillan, the then Conservative Prime Minister, was losing his political touch as he blamed Fleet Street for forcing one of his ministers to resign, and he was politically about to dispose of the bulk of his cabinet. The spy scandal caused a lot of embarrassment to the government, coming as it did at the height of the Cold War. Within a year, Macmillan had resigned. When the Profumo scandal broke, the Prime Minister was heard to mutter, "At least it's a woman." Vassall served 10 of his 18-year sentence before being released on parole in 1972. He entered a monastery and published a book on the story of his life. After his release, he changed his name to Phillips and worked for the British Records Association and for a solicitor's practice in Gray's End Road. He lived in obscurity in St John's Wood and died of a heart attack in November 1996.